just 3 years after signing the Federal Reserve into existence, President Woodrow Wilson made the following statement: "I have unwittingly ruined my country. A great industrial nation is controlled by its system of credit." Today, more and more economists and financial analysts are warning that, as Woodrow Wilson feared, we have become a nation controlled by our system of credit. With overwhelming budget and trade deficits and mountains of money being printed to pay for them, the U.S. now finds itself walking a fine line between economic superpower and a nation slowly sinking in a sea of debt. This legacy of debt can be traced back to the creation of the Federal Reserve in 1913.
I don't think most people understand where money comes from. Even you can talk to a senator and a congressman and say, you know, where does the money come? I don't think they know. When the U.S. government needs money, they don't issue money. They issue bonds, treasury bonds. The Federal Reserve then takes in the bonds and writes a check out against it. Money is created out of thin air.
The idea was sold to the American people and to the Senate and the Congress that we ought to have a Federal Reserve System in 1913. So we got the Federal Reserve System. There was no constitutional authority for it, so it was set up to look like a private institution. And it's funny, a lot of people say the Federal Reserve is really a private bank masquerading as a government agency, when it's just the opposite. It's actually a government agency that was set up to look like a private bank to evade the constitutional restrictions.
Since the Federal Reserve was created in 1913, the purchasing power of the dollar has dropped about 95%. I remember even as a kid buying loaves of bread for a dime, ice cream cones for 3 cents or 5 cents and so forth. That's, you could buy a 5 or 6 course dinner for $1 in New York. And I remember, in my life, I can see what's happened to the purchasing power of the dollar. It's just been destroyed. And to me, it's immoral. For people who are savers, people who save their entire lives, to find that the purchasing power of what they saved is worth nothing.
I've heard so many times that the Federal Reserve would never let a deflation happen in this country, and the Federal Reserve would never let this or that. And what we do is give too much credit to the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve sets interest rates. Really? Well, then why did they let the prime rate get to 20% in 1980? Do you think any politician in the country wanted a prime rate at 20%? And yet that's what we had, despite everything the Federal Reserve did to try to change that, to keep the interest rates down. And when the time comes, the bottom can fall out no matter what the Federal Reserve is doing.
The history of paper currencies are, they all end up museum pieces. None of them have ever lasted. So if you would ask me, what would you leave your great-great-grandkids, say 100 years from now or 75 years from now, the only answer I would give you is gold. Gold will be money. It'll be an item of value anytime you want to, as far as you can look into the future. There's nothing else I can say that about.
Clearly, the creation of the Federal Reserve led to more and more dollars being printed, with those dollars rapidly declining in value. However, from 1913 until 1971, the dollar was still backed in part by U.S. gold reserves. Then came 1971, when President Richard Nixon was faced with this reality. The U.S. had printed up and spent far more dollars around the world than it could possibly back by gold. That brings us to our second key historical factor.